At long last, the NHL offseason is finally here, and boy oh boy, is it already kicking off with some real fireworks.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us on tonight's episode. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for choosing to make Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, and more than anything, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight, obviously, we are chatting in the aftermath of the Stanley Cup Finals finally being over now. The Panthers, of course, have naturally prevailed. Not super surprised by the result, although given the first few games, you might have thought that we had another surprise in store, but the Panthers just appear to be that team, man. They are tough to beat, and I guess congrats to Paul Maurice. Still not over how the Jets' tenure ended, but at least he's, I guess, doing good stuff with the Panthers and now has his second consecutive cup. Would have been nice if that was us. But at least in the meantime, we have our offseason starting, and a lot has already kicked off in the first 24 hours or so since the Cup Finals have finally wrapped. We're going to dive into all of that, including some of the interesting trades, some of the curious signings that might hold some keys to trying to figure out what exactly is about to happen over the summer market and more, and how all of that impacts the Jets coming right up. But before we do, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the offseason has officially started to really kick off. And curiously, I think we are looking at a very unusual summer. I think this season in particular, this coming summer, is going to be one of the craziest off seasons that we've seen in a while. And like, I know everyone always says, yeah, we always predict that every year and nothing ever happens, but we haven't really seen one where the cap is going up to the degree that it is this offseason, right? It's been a while since we've really had lots of revenue leading to a big jump. And so what's about to happen for a lot of teams could be something of a bloodletting for many and a big chance for a lot of other teams to improve. And we're already seeing some early trades, right? Erik Haula has been sent to the Nashville Predators in exchange for a fourth rounder and Jeremy Hansel. Now, this doesn't really do anything for the Preds other than give them someone that they can maybe flip at the trade deadline. And for the Devils, they clear off some cap. They get, an extra little pick for this year's draft. Not like they really care about it so much, but I mean, for the most part, it's just really opening up a roster spot, getting some money off the books, and kind of going from there. And I think that's where, for a team like the Preds, if they're looking to maybe, take on some salary or look for some guys to flip, I kind of wonder what exactly their trade plans are going to be, right? The Jets are one of those teams that I think has a really good opportunity to maybe make the Preds a trade partner this coming summer, but I just don't know how all of this is going to play out. Obviously, we talked about that so-called rumor about Luke Evangelista. Nothing has really come of it so far, but maybe something here or for another Preds player materializes over the next few weeks. We'll have to keep an eye out. I don't think Trotz is really opposed to trading in division, and I certainly don't think he has any real problem trading with the Jets. So this could be a very interesting relationship over the next few weeks. But, that's hardly the only team that the Jets are going to be calling, I'm sure. And, so many things are going to be happening. But amidst all of this, free agency has also kind of kickstarted in a way with teams starting to extend some of their dudes who are about to hit market in a couple of weeks. Now, obviously, we're not seeing new contracts being awarded to players leaving teams and stuff, but we've got some extensions that have maybe kept folks in place. And one of the bigger ones that dropped earlier this afternoon was obviously, the Trent Frederick deal with the Oilers. And I want to talk about this one a little bit more in specificity in a little bit. But broadly speaking, this one is a big, big term and a lower AAV, although not that cheap. A little under $4 million for 8 years with a modified no movement clause. that is a lot of term, and it's not that much of a discount, right? You're not looking at a ton of savings. This kind of reminds me a lot of a much longer version of Lowry's most recent deal. So keep that in mind as we start to head towards Winnipeg's own free agents. Could be a very interesting next few weeks as the Jets try to navigate some of their own RFAs. We also saw Ryan Donato sign a 4-year, $4 million per season deal as well. Much shorter term, much more of a sensible kind of deal, especially when you consider that Donato only just started scoring recently. So this doesn't really lock the Hawks into doing anything too crazy, and it's a movable contract if things really get grim. We also saw some smaller deals. You've got guys like Matthew Rempe, Victor Soderstrom, and a few others signing extensions with their teams. But I think all of this just really shows that we are finally to the offseason. Things are starting. We're seeing, more minor league stuff for the most part, or at least depth signings than anything. But that probably means the Jets are going to be hitting the market here pretty soon too, and dealing with more of their free agents. Now, of course, you've all seen the news. Ehlers will be testing free agency here in July. That's fine. I've heard some rumors about what the Jets have offered. I won't talk about that for now, just in case. But suffice it to say, the Jets have given Nick a fairly decent one. We'll have to see what other teams do. But my feeling is that at the end of the day, if Nick does choose to switch to another team, it is what it is. I think it's at this point kind of down to some of the relationship damage that happened years ago. And at the end of the day, the Jets can only do so much to repair it in a short amount of time. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I will say that Friedman did mention the door's not closed on Winnipeg. So don't lose hope yet. I will say that I don't think it's likely that he comes back, but it's not completely off the table. But I would say, for my own personal feeling, I'm expecting him to walk 85 to 90% with a 10% that maybe he doesn't really get the offer out there that he's looking for, and somebody else, maybe undercuts it a little bit, and the Jets kind of make off of that a good offer, and maybe they can reunite and make this happen. But my personal feeling is somebody like Carolina will bring Ehlers home, and the Jets are going to have to do some real digging and due diligence over the next few weeks to figure out how to answer and respond. But if ever there was a time where a free agent leaving might not be the end of the world for a team, especially a big one like Ehlers, maybe the summer is it. This is a very keen opportunity for the Jets to do a lot of business. Although I will say I would have, hopefully liked to see them not use free agents as much. I think UFA stuff is going to be a bit of a mess. RFAs are where the money's at, and I think that's where the Jets could really do some damage. You've got lots of teams that can't pay some of their expiring youngsters, players who are maybe, not thrilled with their current situation, and I think Winnipeg could really make out like a bandit if they, tread these waters very carefully, make some good decisions, and come out on top. But all of this, of course, builds to a question that I have later this episode. What is this team really? How far off is it from, the truly elite squads like, I suppose, Edmonton, Florida, some of these cup aspirants? Are the Jets really that far off? Is there a way for them to maybe compensate for what they don't have in other ways compared to those teams? We'll chat about all of that coming up here in a little bit, and how the free agent market is already shaping up. But before we do, did want to give a shout out to our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are counting down, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Maybe you took a bit of a hit in the last game with the Pacers dropping a tough one to OKC, but perhaps you're thinking that the Pacers are not down and out yet and that they can claw back in the series. If you're feeling bold, this is the chance to cash in big time. Obviously, you are looking at a rough situation for the Pacers, but Indiana has shown that they can come back from some pretty tough odds. And so if you're new to FanDuel, this is an even better chance to cash in on a potentially big and lucrative bet. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we are chatting about, some of the free agents I mentioned earlier. Obviously, things are kind of kicking off, and this is going to be a very interesting summer for a lot of teams, none more so interesting than the Jets. And Winnipeg is going to have to be very active. In fact, there is a very real chance that we see a lot of business being taken care of. One of the biggest pieces, of course, is Ehlers. That one, I tend to feel we are not going to know how this resolves for at least another month or so, unless Nick signs basically right out of the gates. He's already decided on a team that's maybe not the Jets and does his contract immediately. Not sure we're there yet. I have a feeling that July 1st will roll around. He'll field some offers and kind of make his decision then. So we'll just have to sit tight. But elsewhere, teams are already trying to head off the market, make their own signings. The most controversial one, of course, was the Oilers signing Trent Frederick for 8 years at a little under $4 million, and he comes with a no movement clause, a modified one, obviously. This, for me, just feels like the Oilers trying to turn a trade that didn't quite work out for them at the deadline into something a little more sustainable. Now, Frederick's a good player, don't get me wrong. And I think in a vacuum, you look at like $3.5 to $4 million, especially with the rising cap, and it's not really a big deal. Where I take issue with a contract like this is that it reminds me a lot of what the Preds used to do, which is signing dudes for forever at cheap cap hits, but it's like another roster spot in a lot of term. And when you're a team that's got a lot of money already locked up in some big names, do you really want to add more inflexibility to your team? I just look at that contract structure and I don't understand it. I don't know why you would really go out of your way to do something like this when players of Frederick's caliber aren't that hard to find in free agency, on the trade market, and usually for pretty cheap. Now, again, Frederick, I think, is very solid. I think he brings some real forechecking and offensive ability in a very limited capacity, kind of a little bit in the vein of like an Adam Lowry. He's not a big finisher, but he does chip in around the net. He drives towards that crease area, and he can make some good opportunities and capitalize on some rebounds. But, you're not really looking at him as being a tremendously major offensive driver. And I look at what they already traded away, when they did the McLeod for Savoy trade, and I'm just like, so you basically brought back McLeod, but worse in a lot of ways. And so for me, I'm just kind of fascinated by this. I think it does show that, a lot of teams are going to be trying to cut down on some of the cap hits, but still have to pay a fair bit in terms of wages and salary. And for the Jets, that hopefully means that guys that I think have probably needed to move on for a while now will start to be priced out and head to other greener pastures. I look at players like Appleton, who are kind of in the same vein, and like it's time for the Jets to try and configure their bottom six. I think that their bottom six does a lot of things right, but the Jets have to squeeze out offense elsewhere because let's be real, right? The top six has a lot of skill, but it's not on the level of a lot of other teams. And so the Jets kind of have to do things a little bit differently than some of those other contenders if they really want to keep advancing and getting deeper and really, posing a matchup nightmare to really skilled teams. So this is where I think the Jets need to be very smart. Don't mess around with too many free agents. I think especially in open season, you're not really looking to bring in anyone unless there's like a good value, underrated signing. Unless one of those pops up, though, I think the Jets should really be focused more on the trade market. A deal like Ryan Donato is kind of interesting if you're looking to take a punt. Obviously the Hawks signed a fairly value-friendly one, and it's not like a big salary that's unmovable if Donato really can't repeat, that 25 to 30 goal season, which I would anticipate he doesn't. Maybe that's why he decided to get that bag right now. It's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things when you look at some of the top contracts, but for a guy who has been like a career bottom six player and had one big shooting percentage spike season, it's a really smart bet. You give yourself guaranteed salary for several years. It makes perfect sense if you're Donato. And for the Hawks, it's not the worst deal. Punts like that for the Jets, they can't really take as much. Winnipeg has to be a little choosier about who it signs. But I will say, like a lower cap hit with a shortish term doesn't always scare me, right? Sometimes I kind of like this stuff, especially if the gamble is on a player who shows really good underlying numbers, or in baseball terms, like decent peripherals, and just needs the opportunity to take advantage and do something good. If there are free agents like that who pop up this offseason and their teams don't bring them back, I would say the Jets should be at least curious and watching closely. There's not going to be many of them, and I don't think I would like Winnipeg to commit a lot of cap and roster space to these kinds of players, but, just monitor the situation. As far as what I'm thinking from Winnipeg over the next couple of weeks, obviously Winnipeg's own RFAs are needing some business done. Sandberg, I really expect to be done. I am also interested longer term in what happens with Connor, right? He's got 1 year left, and I would have to think that an extension gets done sometime this summer. It just feels like they're not going to let it get to the last season and him, not have an extension in place. I would expect it's going to be a huge amount of money, probably 11, 12 plus million. It's going to shatter Winnipeg's usual wage structure. So just buckle up. It could be an interesting negotiation, and maybe it doesn't get done this summer. But my feeling is that Winnipeg will want that certainty heading into this coming season to figure out what they need over the next several months, what they need this coming summer, and really trying to map out the next several years of Jets hockey. Connor is obviously one of our biggest free agents, and perhaps even more well-known and well-considered than maybe an Ehlers. I have my own concerns longer term about what his game's going to be like as he ages, but we'll see, right? It's just going to be a lot of money, so I anticipate that being a post-July 1st thing that could be a real Jets market shaker. Otherwise, I guess the other contract that I'm still curious about is Valardi. He's hanging out there, and I just don't know what his future with the Jets holds. I generally feel like he will sign with Winnipeg, and I don't think it's really him that would be hesitant. If anything, I kind of wonder how the Jets are feeling about his long-term fit. He's got some definite physical limitations thanks to some of his injuries, and the Jets need real 2C help. He doesn't really have that center versatility. He's played there before, but it didn't really go super well. And you look at his 5v5 performance, and there are moments where he can really do some great stuff, but on the whole, it's been a little roller coastery. And so I'm just curious to know how the Jets approach this, right? Do you want to bank on him being a routine contributor, or do you feel like he's going to be more of a power play specialist when he's healthy and unfortunately misses a good chunk of the season every other year or so? It's going to be a tougher one. I do think it's also going to limit the term and overall cap hit for his upcoming contract. I just feel like, both parties honestly have some incentive not to go long term. So curious to know how all of this plays out. I will say that for Valardi, he would have more incentive to try and lock things up in the near term, just because for him he's got a little more risk than the Jets do when it comes to his own health. So he'll try and push for I'm sure a big contract, but I just don't see it happening this time around. Interesting, if it doesn't really work out and the Jets start to get down to the wire, does it lead to a trade? And I do think that there's a real possibility that if the Jets are trying to reconfigure how their top nine is built, that a Valardi trade would be a big step towards doing that. I'm not saying that's the route I would want to go immediately, and I would say I'd really want to be patient and see what his camp is asking for and try and figure it out first before you go that route. But if they can't really, meet in the middle and they don't have a clear contract structure that everyone can agree to, then maybe the trade market makes more sense. And so this is going to be a fascinating next few weeks and months for the Jets. I'm both a little nervous and also excited. I think that this is a real chance for the Jets to do a lot of business, and especially with what happened in March, this past trade deadline, I think that there's real pressure from the front office. You saw probably a couple weeks ago the letter that Chipman sent out. That, to me, felt like a real statement of intent that the Jets are going to have more pressure on them internally to make things happen. Whether those things are good or bad, that kind of remains to be seen. But something is going to be in the water. I think Chevy's going to be really aggressive, especially since he didn't get his targets last time. He's got to make something happen this summer, and he has a lot of gaps to fill. So this will be a big summer of change. And amidst all of this, I think one of the biggest questions people have kind of had to grapple with is how far off from like the top contenders are the Jets? I don't think it's an easy question, and I don't know that I love the answer. But we'll dive into all of the evidence and try and figure out where the Jets sit here coming right up. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts as we're chatting a little bit about where the Jets are, competitively speaking, when you look at some of the top contenders out there and where the Jets themselves rank. And I would say right off the bat, the Jets are one of the most interestingly built teams out there. There aren't many squads that are built from the goal out. Most teams are built top to bottom, and the Jets are kind of the opposite in a lot of ways. They are very much starting with Connor Hellebuck and a strong defensive structure. And then, they kind of fit a lot of other pieces around that. They also have, for the forwards, a couple of very key lines and matchups that they really like. And they really build the forward grouping out of that as well. And so, you look at how that kind of contrasts with a lot of teams like, say, the Panthers, where for them, it's really about roster quality in their top nine. They have one of the best top nines in the whole league. And their defense, you wouldn't say that any one particular player, other than maybe like a Forsling or a couple of other guys, is like a superstar, right? Their blue line is made of guys who fit the system and the tactical philosophy of what the Panthers do and how they create offense. Even Kulikov has found a decent role. Schmidt has had a bit of a career resurgence there. None of these guys would probably be thriving in other systems and other teams, but in Florida, they have a role and they've done super well. I also think it's probably worth talking about the fact that a team like the Panthers doesn't commit a lot of money to some of their bottom line guys. They keep swapping them out for underrated and underappreciated players, and part of that is because they have a lot of appeal as a free agent destination. They can afford to get guys to take pay cuts if it means they can stick around and make a real run at a cup. We're already hearing that Sam Bennett is going to be taking a bit of a free agent discount, signing for maybe 8 years at like $7.5 million. That's what Saravalli has suggested. And so, for a lot of reasons, they have some unique draws. But if you're the Jets, right, I think one of the biggest lessons you want to take away from this is flexibility. Winnipeg doesn't have the crazy top-end talent of a Panthers offensively. They don't necessarily have a Barkov. They don't have a Reinhardt in the traditional sense. I think Connor's probably the closest, at least this year's Connor. Past year's Connor's not so much, but this year's Connor played at a very elite level in so many facets offensively. And so he's probably, I guess, your closest analog. But, you start getting into the Bennetts and the Chucks, and Winnipeg's scoring depth really starts to fall off very quickly. Now, Winnipeg, again, has to be a team that's kind of built to win by committee. The Panthers sort of overwhelmed by committee. Carter Verhaeghe is probably a superstar on that squad that people don't really look at as a superstar. At least they didn't before, the Four Nations tournament for kind of meme purposes. But he's also just a stud player. He's like a super skilled attacker. And so Winnipeg is going to have to do things a little differently. And I say that they're kind of far off from a team like the Panthers because, Florida had fantastic draft picks to begin with. They've basically hit on so many of these peripheral pieces that they've added, and they've taken advantage and really been aggressive using both their marketability and the foundation that they already built on to try and reform this core a couple of times. The Jets don't have that same luxury, but I do think Winnipeg can approach this in some similar ways, cycle out your depth. And I think the biggest thing for the Jets is to really start to incorporate more of their youth. Winnipeg, when they rolled 4 lines and had 4 lines capable of applying zone pressure, hemming opponents in, and forechecking them out the wazoo, that was the strongest the Jets ever were. And they've had seasons where they've had moments like that, including this year where I think we saw more of it than we'd seen maybe in previous years, but they're still not at the 17-18 level. And they may never be in that same way, but I think that they can do a lot better than what we've seen the past couple of years. Even, this President's Trophy year, they had a fantastic regular season, but we kind of know that in the playoffs, they do have a couple of key limitations. And that's where I think the Jets are really trying to hit that next level, and where I think the summer really presents the biggest opportunity for the Jets to take a big step forward. Now, if we're talking in raw numbers about how many pieces they are away, we're probably talking 3 to 4 big names, which, look, it's not happening in one summer. It's just crazy, right? You'd be really happy if we got 2 big names. And I think that that's actually achievable for this team. Whether they'll do it, I think, is a very intriguing question. But because of the timing of everything and how many teams are going to be losing good players and maybe even have to take a discount on some of this feels like a really prime hunting ground. I know a lot of you will feel, at least some of what I occasionally do, some skepticism about how aggressive the Jets are going to be. But this summer, I swear, something feels different. I feel like Winnipeg is moving in a different direction, and I want to feel optimistic. We'll have to see how they handle like the whole Ehlers thing. If Ehlers walks and signs elsewhere, how they replace him is, for me, the most interesting situation of all. If they bring in and go for a big player like a Paterka or something of that nature, talk about a transformational deal that could really alter the shape of this franchise going forward. I'd be very in favor of something like that. And in fact, maybe it's even an improvement in a lot of ways. You get younger, you add real, cost controlled skill, a young 23-year-old player who brings tremendous offensive potential. Stuff like that would be an incredible blessing for this Jets team. And I think that they could try and make something about, a deal like that happen. But, the Jets are going to have to pony up, and I hope that they're willing to do so. I don't think that the Jets should have as many sacred cows as they have in the past. There are some guys that you don't want to give up, but if the right deal comes along, be open to it, right? Consider it, think about it, and figure out when you really want this core to start clicking. But I think the Jets can also take advantage of teams like Vegas that need to move some salary and pick up really good stopgap options until maybe some of your own internal prospects really start to hit their stride and can take over those roles eventually. Bill Carlson, maybe you look at a Mark Stone. There's all sorts of stuff out there, all sorts of possibilities, and it's all going to kick off over these next few weeks. So as we run up to the draft, we'll start to talk a little more about how the Jets might approach this coming July 1st and ultimately the draft as well. This is, again, really uncharted territory for basically the whole league and especially for the Jets. So with all of that comes a lot of risk, but I'm going to choose to be optimistic about it. I think that there's a lot of opportunity, and I hope the Jets see it too. Curious to know if you feel that they understand the moment and if you feel like they're going to take advantage of it. Drop your thoughts and feelings in the comments below or at my social medias at AgeLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow and Friday for even more off-season coverage and hopefully some Jets news. We are looking for a big contract extension, some hot, juicy rumors. It's coming, and hopefully it happens as soon as the next couple of days. But for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you tomorrow, and as always, have a great night, and go Jets go.